My stepson became CEO after my wife died. He fired me 2 days later. He stood in the middle of my living room, surrounded by his Ivy League friends, and laughed as security escorted me out into the rain. He told me I was a relic. He told me the company needed a modern face. He thought he had won. What Hunter did not know was that he had only inherited the title, not the engine. He didn't know that I still owned 80% of the intellectual property and assets that made the company run. He thought he was throwing out the trash, but he was actually throwing away the keys to the kingdom. Monday morning is going to be very interesting. My name is Alonzo Hayes. I am 68 years old. I have spent my life with grease under my fingernails and diesel fuel in my veins. I built Hayes Global Logistics from a single rusted pickup truck into a transportation empire. I know every bolt in every engine of my fleet, but to my stepson Hunter and his wife Kylie, I was just the help that stuck around too long. Before I tell you how I taught them the most expensive lesson of their lives, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by someone who has never worked a hard day in their life. The disrespect began before the dirt even hit the casket. It was a Tuesday in November, and Chicago was living up to its reputation. The wind cut across the cemetery like a razor, carrying a freezing rain that soaked through my black wool coat. I stood by the open grave of Esther, the woman I had loved for 30 years. I did not feel the cold. I only felt the massive gaping hole in my chest where my heart used to be. I wanted to stand there until the grave diggers finished. I wanted to make sure she was covered warm and safe. I owed her that respect, but Hunter had other plans. 50 yards away on the paved path, a black Mercedes SUV sat idling. The engine was running to keep the heater blasting. Through the tinted window, I could see Hunter. He was not crying. He was not looking at his mother's coffin. He was looking at his phone, his thumbs flying across the screen. He hadn't even stepped out onto the grass because he didn't want to get mud on his $2,000 Italian loafers. I watched the window roll down just 2 inches. Hunter shouted at the foreman of the cemetery crew. "Hey, can we speed this up? I have a schedule to keep." The foreman looked at me, embarrassed. I nodded slowly, giving him permission to continue. That was the first strike. Hunter treated his mother's burial like a logistics delay, a traffic jam he needed to clear so he could get back to his comfortable life. I walked over to the car as the crew began to shovel the earth. I tapped on the glass. Hunter rolled the window down halfway. He looked annoyed, not grieving. "Get in, Alonzo. You're soaking wet and you smell like wet dog. We need to get to the reception. The board members are waiting." I looked at him. This boy was 32 years old. He had an MBA on his wall and a silver spoon in his mouth that I had paid for. I spoke quietly. "Your mother is being buried, Hunter. Turn off the engine and show some respect." He scoffed, rolling his eyes. "She's gone, Alonzo. Standing in the rain isn't going to bring her back. Besides, Kylie is waiting for us at the house to go over the catering bill." I turned my back on him and walked back to the grave. I stood there for another 20 minutes until the last spade of dirt smoothed over the mound. I said my final goodbye to Esther, promising her I would try to keep the peace. I didn't know then that peace was already impossible. The reception was held at our home, a sprawling estate in Lake Forest that Esther and I had bought 10 years ago. When I walked in, dripping wet, it didn't feel like a house of mourning. It felt like a corporate mixer. The music was playing a little too loudly. The guests weren't family and neighbors. They were consultants, lawyers, and Hunter's sycophants from the country club. They were drinking my vintage scotch and eating canapés, talking about stock prices and mergers. I went upstairs to change into a dry suit. When I came down, I tapped a spoon against a champagne glass. I wanted to thank everyone for coming. I wanted to tell them a story about how Esther used to handle the dispatch radio in the early days, how she kept the drivers awake with her jokes. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice raspy. Before I could get the second sentence out, Hunter stepped in front of me. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first truck. He clapped his hands, cutting me off, stealing the room's attention. "Thank you all for being here," Hunter boomed, his voice practiced and smooth. "It is a sad day, but also a day of new beginnings. As per my mother's wishes and the board's ratification this morning, I am stepping into the role of CEO, effective immediately. There was polite applause. I stood there stunned. We hadn't even read the will yet. But Hunter wasn't finished. He turned to me, a smile plastered on his face that didn't reach his cold blue eyes. "And we have to thank Alonzo for his decades of service." Hunter reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He held it out to me in front of everyone. "It wasn't a gift, it was a prop. Alonzo, we know how hard you've worked. But the company is moving in a new digital direction. We think it is time for you to finally rest. Inside this envelope is a very generous severance package and your retirement papers. We call it the Golden Parachute." The room went deadly silent. This was a public execution. He was firing me at my wife's funeral reception. He was handing me a pink slip while I was still grieving. I looked at the envelope. I didn't take it. "Hunter," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "What is this?" "It's called progress, Alonzo," he whispered, leaning in close so only I could hear. "You're a mechanic. You fix trucks. I run corporations. You don't fit the new image. Look at you. You're old, you're tired, and frankly, you're not the face of a tech-forward logistics firm." I looked around the room. I saw Kylie, his wife, smirking in the corner sipping a martini. She gave a little wave. I realized then that this had been planned for months. They were just waiting for Esther to die. I took the envelope. I didn't open it. I knew what was inside. An insult. A check that they thought would buy my silence. "Is that it?" I asked. "Not quite," Hunter said. He snapped his fingers. Two men in dark suits stepped forward from the hallway. They weren't my usual security team. I knew all my guards by name. I knew their wives and their kids. These men were strangers, muscles for hire. "Since you're no longer an employee or an executive," Hunter said, his voice rising so the room could hear, "I can't have you on the premises with access to sensitive company data. And since the deed to this house is transferred to me as the primary beneficiary, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "Leave," I repeated. "This is my home." "It was," Hunter corrected. "Now it's corporate housing for the CEO, which is me. You can pick up your personal effects from the office tomorrow. Security will escort you out." One of the guards stepped into my personal space. He put a hand on my elbow. It was a light touch, but the threat was heavy. I looked at Hunter. I looked at the boy I had raised since he was 10 years old. The boy I had taught to throw a baseball. The boy whose tuition I had paid. I didn't see a son. I saw a stranger. I pulled my arm away from the guard. "I don't need help walking," I said. I straightened my tie. I looked Hunter dead in the eye. The room was so quiet. You could hear the ice melting in the glasses. "You are making a mistake, Hunter," I said calmly. Hunter laughed, a dry, arrogant sound. "The only mistake was thinking you could stay in the big leagues forever, Alonzo. Go enjoy your retirement. Go fishing. Leave the business to the professionals." I nodded slowly. I gripped the envelope tightly in my hand. "Careful, son," I said. "That chair you are sitting in is hotter than you think. And the engine that drives this company, you don't have the key." I turned and walked to the front door. The guards followed me close like I was a criminal. Hunter called out behind me, "Don't forget to leave your badge at the front desk tomorrow." I stepped out onto the porch. The rain was still falling. The door slammed shut behind me, locking with a heavy thud. I stood there for a moment, looking at the closed door of the house I had paid for. I was 68 years old. I was wet, cold, and homeless. I had just been fired from the company I built with my bare hands. Most men would have broken down. Most men would have cried or banged on the door. But I am not most men. I walked down the long driveway toward the gate. I reached into my pocket and felt the cold metal of a flash drive I always kept with me. Hunter thought he had taken everything. He thought the company was just trucks and buildings and bank accounts. He forgot about the paperwork. He forgot that 10 years ago I separated the assets. He forgot that while he was partying in college, I was restructuring the holding company. I took out my phone. It was wet with rain. I dialed a number. "Sienna," I said when she answered. "Alonzo, is everything okay?" "I heard about the funeral. I am so sorry. Save the condolences," I said, my voice steady. "Initiate Protocol 0. There was a pause on the line. Then the sharp voice of my lawyer cut through the static. "Are you sure, Alonzo? Once we start this, there is no going back. It will cripple the operating company." I looked back at the mansion. I could see the silhouette of Hunter in the window, raising a glass of my scotch. "I am sure," I said. "He wants to play CEO. Let's see how he drives a car with no engine." I hung up the phone and walked into the dark. Monday morning was coming. and it was going to be a bloodbath. I arrived at the headquarters of Hayes Global Logistics at 9 o'clock sharp the next morning. The building was a structure of steel and glass that I had commissioned 15 years ago. It stood tall against the gray Chicago skyline, a monument to 3 decades of sweat and sacrifice. I parked my black sedan in the visitor lot because I knew my reserved spot, right next to the front doors, would already be taken. I walked up the concrete steps, feeling the weight of the morning wind against my chest. I reached for the door handle, the same brass handle I had polished myself when the janitorial staff was shorthanded, but it felt cold and foreign today. I walked into the lobby. The smell hit me first. For years this lobby had smelled of lemon polish and fresh coffee, a welcoming scent that told our drivers they were home. Now it smelled of something sterile, like ozone and expensive soulless perfume. I walked toward the security turnstiles. I pulled my badge from my pocket. It was worn at the edges, a testament to how many times I had swiped it to come in early and leave late. I held it up to the scanner. Usually, the machine would let out a cheerful chirp and the light would turn green. Today it let out a harsh low buzz. The light flashed angry access denied. I tried again. Buzz red light. I looked at the small screen. It did not say error. A card deactivated. "Excuse me, sir," a voice called out from the reception desk. "You cannot be in this area without a pass." I turned to look at the desk. The old receptionist, Mrs. Higgins, who always had a jar of candy for the drivers and knew every employee's birthday, was gone. In her place sat a young woman I did not recognize. She was looking at me over the rim of her designer glasses, her fingers hovering over a sleek white keyboard. She looked bored and slightly annoyed that I was interrupting her morning scroll through social media. "I am Alonzo Hayes," I said, keeping my voice level. "I founded this company. I am here to collect my personal effects." She typed something into her computer and frowned. "I do not have an Alonzo Hayes in the active employee directory. You will have to wait over there by the wall while I call executive management to verify your story." She pointed to a sleek, uncomfortable-looking bench that had replaced the leather armchairs I had bought. I stood my ground, verify my story. The audacity was breathtaking. I looked up at the wall behind her. The large oil painting of the first truck I ever bought, a beat-up 1980 Ford, was gone. In its place was a giant neon sign that simply said, "Disrupt," in bright pink letters. This was not my company anymore. It was a playground for children who had never changed a tire in their lives. I waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Employees walked by, people I had hired, people whose mortgages I had helped pay. They looked at the floor. They looked at their phones. They looked anywhere but at me. Fear is a powerful silencer. Hunter had clearly made an example of anyone who showed loyalty to the old regime. Finally, the elevator doors pinged open. It was not Hunter who stepped out, it was Kylie. She was wearing a white power suit that cost more than my father made in a lifetime. She walked across the marble floor, her high heels clicking a sharp, aggressive rhythm. She was not carrying a clipboard or a file. She was carrying a cardboard box, a simple, brown beat-up cardboard box. She stopped 5 feet away from me. She did not say hello. She did not offer condolences for her mother-in-law. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust, as if I were a stain on her pristine white carpet. "We anticipated you might show up, Alonzo," Kylie said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "So, I took the liberty of packing up your office myself. We could not have you wandering the halls disrupting the workflow. We are very busy pivoting to the new model." She held the box out, but she did not hand it to me. She let it drop. The box hit the floor with a heavy thud. The sound echoed in the silent lobby. I heard the distinct crack of glass breaking inside. "Oops," Kylie said, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. Her eyes were dancing with malice. My hand slipped. "That box was so heavy. I do not know why you kept so much junk in a C-suite office. It really cluttered the aesthetic we are going for." I looked down at the box. Lying on top, half spilled out, was a framed photograph. It was the picture of Esther and me on the day we opened our first warehouse. We were covered in dust, tired but smiling like we owned the world. The glass over Esther's face was shattered. A jagged crack ran right through her smile. I slowly bent down, my knees ached, but I did not let it show. I picked up the photograph. I brushed the glass shards off Esther's face with my thumb. "This is not junk, Kylie," I said softly. This is history. History does not pay the bills. Alonzo, she snapped, her mask slipping. We are rebranding. We are getting rid of the old dusty, blue-collar image, and that includes you and your sentimental trash. Look at this place. She gestured widely to the lobby. We are going to paint it all white. Minimalist. Clean. No more grease. No more old men telling war stories about the good old days. She kicked the box slightly with the toe of her shoe. Take your debris and go, Alonzo. Security will be here in 2 minutes to escort you off the property for trespassing. I stood up, holding the broken picture frame against my chest. I looked at this woman who had married my stepson. She was hollow. She was all surface and no depth. She thought power was about furniture and logos. She had no idea that power was about leverage. I will go, I said. But remember this, Kylie, you can paint over the walls, but you cannot paint over the foundation. And I laid the foundation. Before she could answer, the automatic doors slid open behind me. Hunter walked in. He was flanked by 2 security guards. He looked fresh, rested, and arrogant. He saw the box on the floor and smirked. I see Kylie handled the trash, Hunter said. Good, but there is one more thing, Alonzo. He held out his hand, palm up, the keys. He said. I looked at him. Which keys? The company car. Hunter said. The Lincoln. It is a company asset, and since you are no longer an officer of the company, you cannot drive it. Also the phone, the one I know you have in your pocket. The bill is paid by Hayes Global. Hand it over. This was petty. He wanted to strip me of everything. He wanted to leave me on the curb with a box of broken glass. Unable to drive, unable to call for a ride. He wanted to see me broken. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the keys to the Lincoln Town car. I had driven that car for 8 years. It had over 200,000 miles on it. I loved that car. I dropped the keys into his hand. Then I took out the phone. I had already wiped the data the night before, thanks to Protocol Zero. It was just a piece of plastic and glass. Now I placed it in his hand on top of the keys. Is that everything? I asked. Or do you want the shirt off my back too? Hunter laughed, closing his fist around the keys. Keep the shirt, old man. You are going to need it. It is cold out there in the real world. He turned to the security guards. Make sure he walks off the property. If he stops, if he looks back, arrest him. I bent down and picked up the cardboard box. It was heavy with the weight of 30 years of memories. I held it with one arm. I held the broken picture of Esther with the other. I turned my back on Hunter and Kylie. I walked toward the door. The young receptionist watched me go, her mouth slightly open. I walked past the security guards. One of them, a man named Mike, whom I had hired 5 years ago, looked like he wanted to say something. I saw the shame in his eyes. I gave him a small nod, letting him know I did not blame him. He had a family to feed. I stepped out into the biting wind. The door slid shut behind me. I was standing on the sidewalk. My car was in the lot, but it was not mine anymore. My office was gone. My title was gone. I began to walk. I did not look for a taxi. I just walked. The box dug into my side. The wind stung my eyes. But as I walked away from the glass tower I had built, I did not feel defeated. I felt lighter. They had taken the trappings of power. They had taken the symbols, but they had not taken the source. I walked 2 blocks to a small diner where I knew the coffee was hot and the owner knew my name. I sat down in a booth and placed the box on the seat opposite me. I asked the waitress for a black coffee and a quarter for the payphone in the back. Hunter and Kylie thought they had erased me. They thought that by taking my badge and my car, they had deleted Alonzo Hayes. They were about to find out that you cannot delete the man who wrote the code. I drank the coffee. It tasted better than the fancy espresso in the new lobby. I looked at the broken picture of Esther. Don't worry, honey, I whispered to the glass. We are just getting started. I stood up and walked to the payphone. It was time to make the call that would turn their victory party into a funeral. I dropped the quarter in the slot. It made a solid, heavy sound, the sound of consequences falling into place. Monday was over. The erasure was complete. Now it was time for the rewrite. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress and listened to the sounds of my new reality. The apartment was a 3rd-floor walk-up in a part of Chicago, where the streetlights flickered and the police sirens were a lullaby. The wallpaper was peeling in the corner, revealing layers of paint from decades past. It was a 1-bedroom unit with a kitchenette that smelled permanently of boiled cabbage and stale cigarettes. It was a far cry from the 10,000-square-foot mansion in Lake Forest with its heated floors and views of the lake. But as I looked around the cramped space, I did not feel fear. I felt a strange sense of familiarity. This was where I had started. The radiator clanked and hissed, spitting out a dry heat that made my throat scratchy. I walked to the window and looked down at the street. In Lake Forest, the silence was expensive. Here, the noise was free. I placed the broken picture of Esther on the small, wobbly nightstand. Even with the glass shattered, her smile lit up the dingy room. I touched her face through the cracks. They took the house, Esther, I whispered, but they cannot take the home we built inside us. My reflection was interrupted by a heavy, hesitant knock at the door. I stiffened. Few people knew where I was. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. I would recognize that grease-stained cap anywhere. It was Barney. I opened the door. Barney stood there, twisting his cap in his large, calloused hands. He was wearing his Hayes Global Mechanic uniform, but the patch with his name on it had been ripped off. Barney was 60 years old. He had been with me for 35 of them. He was the first mechanic I ever hired. He knew the engines of my fleet better than he knew his own children. "Boss," Barney said, his voice cracking. I didn't know where else to go. "Come in, Barney," I said, stepping aside. Barney walked in, looking around the small apartment with sad, tired eyes. He sat heavily on the cheap wooden chair by the window. "They fired me, Alonzo," Barney said softly. The words hung in the air like smoke. I knew Hunter was cleaning house. But I thought he would have the sense to keep the head of maintenance. You cannot run a logistics company without the man who keeps the wheels turning. "Why?" I asked. Barney let out a bitter laugh and pulled out a crumpled termination notice. "Hunter brought in these new consultants. They gave us all iPads. They said we had to log every repair into this new cloud system. I tried, Alonzo, but my fingers are thick. I have arthritis. I couldn't navigate the menus fast enough. Hunter came down to the garage this morning. He didn't ask about the truck I had just fixed. He just looked at the tablet. He laughed at me. He told his assistant to get rid of the dinosaurs." Barney put his face in his hands. "He fired the whole senior crew, anyone over 50. No severance. I have a mortgage, Alonzo. My wife needs insulin. This was not just business anymore. This was a crime against decency. Hunter wasn't just stealing my company. He was destroying the lives of the people who built it." I stood up. The coldness in my chest was replaced by a white-hot inferno of protective rage. I walked over to Barney and put a hand on his shoulder. "You go home to your wife. You tell her that Alonzo said everything is going to be fine." I went to the nightstand and picked up my burner phone. I dialed my lawyer, Sienna. "Sienna, it's Alonzo. Hunter fired the senior maintenance crew." "He fired Barney." There was a silence on the line. Sienna knew Barney, that foolish boy. She whispered, "Does he not know that the maintenance records are required by federal law to be signed off by a certified master mechanic?" "He thinks an app can do it," I said. "Sienna, open the safe in your office. Pull out the operating agreement for Hayes Holdings. Look at the clause regarding essential personnel and intellectual property integrity." I heard papers shuffling. "It says that the lease of all heavy machinery and the license for the client database is contingent upon the continuous employment of key personnel designated by the chairman." "And you are the chairman. The list includes the head of maintenance." "Exactly," I said. "By firing Barney, Hunter violated the master lease agreement. He just legally voided his right to use my trucks. Draft the cease and desist order tonight. But don't send it yet. Let him have his press conference with TechStream tomorrow. We hit him when the spotlight is brightest." I hung up the phone and looked at Barney. "Go home and get some sleep. Monday was hard, but Tuesday is going to be historic." The next morning, I watched the world change through the cracked screen of my prepaid smartphone. Hunter was live streaming from the executive suite. He had painted the walls a jarring bright orange, the color of innovation, he called it. He was walking around using words that meant nothing. Synergy, paradigm shift, disruption. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from him. He wanted an audience for his victory lap. "I hope you are watching the feed," Hunter shouted over the background noise. "In 1 hour, I am signing the exclusive partnership with TechStream. We are going to be the first fully automated logistics fleet in the Midwest." "No more grease monkeys. Be careful, Hunter," I said quietly. "TechStream demands 99% uptime. If a single truck breaks down, the penalties are severe." Hunter scoffed. "With their algorithms, trucks won't break down. It is called predictive maintenance. Go home, old man. He hung up. I turned on my small television to the local business news channel. They were covering the signing ceremony live from the Ritz-Carlton. Hunter stood next to Julian, the CEO of Techstream. Julian looked like a predator who had just spotted a wounded gazelle. Hunter grabbed a gold pen and signed the thick leather binder without reading the fine print. If he had, he would have seen Appendix C, subsection 4, the Hayes Protocol. It stated that any failure to maintain the fleet according to my certified protocol would result in immediate default, allowing Techstream to seize assets. Hunter had just signed his own death warrant. By Tuesday night, the Midwest was hit with a freezing storm. 70 miles outside of Chicago, on the shoulder of Interstate 90, truck number 452 sat dead in the darkness. The driver, Miller, knew exactly what was wrong: the high-pressure oil pump. In the old days, Barney would have diagnosed it over the radio in 10 seconds. But Barney was gone. Miller had to use the new iPad app. He got connected to a call center agent in another country. The predictive maintenance software says your truck should be running at 100% efficiency, the agent said pleasantly. The software is wrong. Miller yelled, watching his breath turn to ice. The engine is dead. Send help. I cannot override the system, sir. Please stay with your vehicle. Miller was left to freeze while $50,000 worth of fresh produce turned to solid ice in the back. The fleet was bleeding, but the new captain was too busy looking in the mirror to notice the wound. Back in the city, Kylie was hosting the Hayes Global Rebranding Gala at the Drake Hotel. She had taken the emergency maintenance fund, the money I kept for situations exactly like Miller's, and spent it on ice sculptures and caviar. She wore a silver dress that sparkled under the chandeliers, laughing with bankers who had never shipped a package in their lives. I walked into the ballroom wearing my classic black tuxedo. The jazz band stopped playing. The room parted for me like the Red Sea. I had walked in with Julian, the CEO of Techstream, who thought it would be a funny power play to invite the old lion to watch the young wolf eat. He didn't know the old lion still had teeth. I walked straight up to Hunter and Kylie. Sweat was beading on Hunter's forehead. "What are you doing here, Alonzo?" Hunter hissed. "Get out. I am not the one ruining anything, Hunter." I leaned in close to his ear. Right now, truck 452 is sitting dead on Interstate 90. The driver is freezing. The high-pressure valve on the entire fleet of 2018 models is faulty. I had a schedule to replace them starting Monday, but you fired the team that was going to do it. Hunter rolled his eyes. "The system shows green across the board. Go home and watch TV. I am going home," I said with genuine pity. "But you should check your phone. The driver just called the state police to rescue him because your dispatch center left him to die. Remember that I told you there was a leak, and you chose to buy ice sculptures instead of patches." By Thursday morning, the panic in the executive suite had reached a fever pitch. 3 more trucks had stalled, cargo was rotting, Techstream was sending threatening emails about breach of contract. Hunter was drowning, looking for a miracle to pay for emergency repairs, because Kylie had spent the reserves on champagne. That was when he found my trap. Hunter was digging through the automated payment history and saw a recurring monthly transfer of $50, Susan going to an entity listed as Hayes Intellectual Properties LLC. To a mind like Hunter's, trained to look for shortcuts, it looked like a slush fund. He assumed I had been embezzling money for decades. He didn't bother to check the corporate registry. He didn't realize that Hayes IP was the entity that owned the patents for the logistics software he was currently failing to operate. He thought he was looking at a robbery. He was actually looking at the rent check. Hunter called his attack dog lawyer, Sterling. They bypassed civil procedures and went straight to the district attorney, spinning a story about me being a flight risk. He wanted the world to see Alonzo Hayes in handcuffs. At 9 p.m., the sirens filled my small apartment. 2 squad cars and a black unmarked sedan pulled up. Hunter stood by the hood in a trench coat, smiling. The police pounded on my door. I opened it calmly in my best 3-piece suit. They handcuffed me and marched me down the stairs. The neighbors peeked out, terrified, outside. The blue and red lights were blinding. Hunter held up his phone and took a picture of me in cuffs. "Smile for the camera, Alonzo," he called out. "The rise and fall of a thief." I planted my feet and looked straight into his soul. "You think you have won, Hunter? You think this is the end? You just handed me the microphone. And when I speak, the whole world is going to hear the truth. The holding cell at the precinct smelled of bleach and dried sweat. The news channels were running my old mugshot with the headline, "Logistics Tycoon, Arrested in Embezzlement Scandal." Hunter had used the media to paint me as a greedy old man. A tired detective named Miller came into the interrogation room with Captain Reynolds. They slammed the bank records on the table. $50,000 a month going into a shell company, Detective Miller said. You are paying yourself with company money, no, Detective, I said smoothly. That is rent. Hayes Global Logistics is an operating company. It does not own the trucks. It does not own the software code. It does not own the brand name. All of those assets are owned by a holding company, Hayes Intellectual Properties. Captain Reynolds frowned. I don't see any lease agreements here, because Hunter didn't give them to you. Check the corporate charter filed 10 years ago. It states clearly that the operating company must pay a licensing fee to the holding company. The $50,000 is a discounted rate. By stopping those payments and having me arrested for collecting them, Hunter has triggered a default clause. Reynolds ordered Miller to check the Secretary of State database. 2 minutes later, Miller looked up pale. He is right, Captain. It is all legal. Reynolds unlocked my handcuffs himself, apologizing profusely. That little son of a bitch played us for a photo op, Reynolds muttered. He offered to release me immediately and hold a press conference. Release me, I said, rubbing my wrists, but do not announce it. Let Hunter believe I am rotting in this cell all weekend. Monday is the shareholder meeting. I want him to feel the full weight of his victory before I pull the rug out from under him. As I walked out the back exit, Detective Miller asked one final question. Mr. Hayes, if you own the software and Hunter just breached the contract, what happens to the software now? The contract says the license is revoked immediately, I replied. Come Sunday noon, I am going to turn it off. Sunday was supposed to be their victory lap. Hunter and Kylie were drinking vintage Dom Perignon in the executive penthouse, giving interviews about how they excised the cancer from the company. At exactly noon, the massive 80-inch monitors in the command center, displaying the real-time GPS locations of 3,000 trucks flickered. The beautiful web of green lights vanished. In their place, a solid block of angry crimson red filled every screen. A message appeared in bold white letters. License expired out of origin. Revoked to breach of contract system locked. Please contact the intellectual profitable immediately. What did you do? Hunter, Kylie shrieked, dropping her glass. Hunter pounded on the keyboard, but it was dead. He called his new IT director, Jason. Fix the screens, reboot the mainframes. We did. Jason's voice trembled over the phone. It is a hard lock embedded in the firmware, military-grade encryption. The system is asking for a cryptographic key. Whoever wrote this code built a trapdoor, and they just pulled the lever. Within 30 seconds, the room was filled with the cacophony of 1,000 ringing phones. Dispatch units in Ohio were screaming that their dashboards had gone black on the turnpike. Warehouse managers in Detroit yelled that the robotic sorting arms had frozen mid-air, leaving 40 tons of seafood to rot. The refrigeration units on the trailers shut down, throwing millions of dollars of cargo into jeopardy. The modern trucks Hunter loved so much were computers on wheels. Without the software, they were just heavy metal statues blocking highways across the country. Hunter tried to log into the backup servers. Access denied. User account suspended by administrator. There was only one administrator, the man he had put in a cage. Then the private red phone on the desk rang. It was Julian from TechStream. Your entire fleet has gone dark, Julian said, his voice cold as liquid nitrogen. You are in breach of contract. You owe TechStream $50 million in performance penalties. We are freezing your bank accounts. Every penny that comes in goes to us. Good luck, Hunter. The line went dead. Kylie threw her phone at Hunter. You idiot. You told me the software deal was a sure thing. I spent $300,000 on that gala. You spent the emergency fund? Hunter roared. That was the money I needed to fight TechStream. You are broke, you are incompetent, and I am leaving, Kylie spat, grabbing her purse. But before she could leave, Lawyer Sterling burst through the doors, his face gray and his tie crooked. He was holding the original incorporation documents. We have a bigger problem. Sterling said breathlessly. I found the unlock protocol for the master source code. It has a biometric override. In the event of a catastrophic system lockdown, only the biometric data of the registered intellectual property owner can reset the server. Hunter went silent. He stared at the red screens. Say it, he whispered. It is Alonzo. Sterling said grimly. We need his thumbprint on the physical server in the basement. Not you, not me. If Alonzo does not touch that scanner within 24 hours, the data wipes itself permanently. The shipping logs, the financial records, the customer database. Everything goes to zero. Hunter sank into his chair. My chair. He finally realized the magnitude of his arrogance. He had arrested the only man who could save him. He is in jail, Hunter whispered. I put him in jail. Then you better get him out, Sterling said. And you better pray he is in a forgiving mood. Because right now, Alonzo Hayes is not just the chairman. He is God, and you are a sinner in the hands of an angry deity. Sunday night was the longest night of his life. The clock on the wall of the executive suite ticked loudly in the silence of the locked-down building. It was 2 a.m. The city of Chicago was asleep, but inside the glass tower of Hayes Global, there was no rest. The emergency lights bathed the office in a harsh crimson glow, creating deep shadows that danced in the corners. Hunter sat at the desk that used to be mine, staring at the telephone as if it were a loaded gun. For the past hour, he had walked circles around the room. He had loosened his tie until it hung limp around his neck. He had rolled up his sleeves, exposing the expensive watch that was now counting down the minutes to his destruction. I can only imagine the war raging inside his head. Hunter was a man built on pride. He had spent his entire life convincing himself that he was smarter because he went to the right schools, and more deserving because he had the right bloodline. To him, I was just the mechanic who got lucky. To pick up that phone and call me was not just an admission of defeat. It was a shattering of his entire identity. He looked at the red screens again. License expired. He thought about the investors arriving at 8 a.m. He thought about Julian from TechStream, waiting to seize the bank accounts. The fear of humiliation finally outweighed the fear of submission. He realized that if he did not call me, he would lose everything. He reached out his hand, trembling so violently he had to steady it with his other hand. He picked up the receiver and dialed my number. I was sitting in my armchair in the small apartment, drinking herbal tea and listening to a Miles Davis record. I had been waiting for this moment since the day he fired me. When the phone rang, I let it ring 3 times. I wanted him to sweat on the 4th ring. I answered, "Hello, Hunter." My voice was level, devoid of emotion. "Hey, Alonzo." Hunter's voice was high-pitched and breathless. He was trying to sound casual, like a son catching up with his father, not a drowning man begging for a life vest. "I hope I didn't wake you. We have a bit of a situation down here at the office. Just a technical glitch. The IT guys say it is some old legacy code that needs an override. We figured you could come down and take a look. We could pay you a consulting fee." I took a sip of my tea. The audacity of this boy was truly limitless. He had me arrested 6 hours ago, and now he was offering me a consulting fee. "You want me to come down there?" "To the building I was banned from, to help the company that fired me, to assist the CEO who put me in handcuffs." Hunter went silent. His breathing was ragged. "Look, Alonzo, let's not dwell on the past. The arrest thing, that was just a misunderstanding. I can drop the charges tomorrow morning." "That is very generous of you, Hunter," I said, letting the words hang in the air. "But I am not worried about the charges. The police already know the truth. They know I own the software. They know you are running pirated code." Hunter's facade finally cracked. The panic bled through. "Okay, fine. You own the software. You proved you were smart. Now please turn it back on. We are losing millions. The trucks are stopped. The drivers are freezing. Do it for them. You always said you cared about the employees, right? Prove it." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark street. "I do care about them, Hunter. That is why I am doing this. I am saving the company from you." "What are you talking about?" Hunter screamed, losing control. "If we default on the TechStream contract, we are dead." "We are not dead, Hunter," I said coldly. "You are, Alonzo, please," Hunter sobbed. I heard the break in his throat. "I will give you anything. I will give you a seat on the board. I will give you the chairman title back. Just come down here. I need you. I am scared." Alonzo, for a brief second I felt a twinge of pity. I remembered the 10-year-old boy I used to take to baseball games. But then I remembered the way he laughed when the police put me in the squad car. He was not sorry for what he did. He was sorry he got caught. If I saved him now, he would learn nothing. I am not coming down, Hunter, I said. But you have to. No, I don't. You wanted to be the CEO. You wanted to be the man in charge. Well, this is what being in charge feels like. It feels like weight. It feels like responsibility. You cannot outsource this, Alonzo. Wait. Hunter begged. I am done waiting, I said. You have a board meeting at 8 o'clock. I suggest you spend the next few hours preparing your resignation speech. Because when I walk into that room tomorrow, I am not coming as your stepfather. I am coming as your creditor. Good night, Hunter. I hung up the phone. On the other end of the line, Hunter stared at the receiver. The dial tone buzzed, a flat, monotonous sound of finality. He let out a primal scream of rage and despair. He grabbed the expensive crystal lamp from his desk and hurled it at the wall. He smashed his laptop against the floor. He destroyed the office, just like he had destroyed the company. He fell to his knees in the middle of the wreckage, alone in the red light. The executioner was coming in the morning. The sun rose over Chicago on Monday morning, but inside the boardroom on the 50th floor of the Hayes Global Tower, it felt like a long, dark winter. The air conditioning was humming, but the 20 board members and shareholders seated around the massive oval table were sweating. They were looking at Hunter Whitmore with the hunger of a wolf pack encircling a wounded deer. Hunter sat at the head of the table. He looked nothing like the arrogant prince who had fired me a week ago. His suit was wrinkled, his tie hung loosely like a noose, his eyes were bloodshot. On the wall behind him, the giant screen was still displaying the same red error message, license expired. Mr. Henderson, who represented the pension fund that owned 15% of the company, stood up, his face turning a deep purple. This is unacceptable. We have lost 30% of our market value in pre-market trading. Techstream has filed a lien against our accounts. We cannot even pay for fuel, Hunter. What is your plan? I am working on it, Hunter croaked. It is just a negotiation tactic. Alonzo will come around. Alonzo is in jail. Henderson yelled, slamming his hand on the table. You arrested the founder of this company on charges that look increasingly like a fabrication. And now we hear reports that he owns the software. Does the man you threw in a cell hold the keys to this building? Hunter could not make eye contact. It is complicated, he whispered. It is negligence. A woman from the investment bank cut in. We are voting to remove you as CEO effective immediately. You can't, Hunter pleaded. I am the majority shareholder. I inherited my mother's stock. We can if you are in breach of fiduciary duty, Henderson said coldly. I stood outside the double oak doors, listening to the chaos. I adjusted my cuffs and checked my tie in the reflection of the glass wall. I looked at the team standing behind me. To my right was Sienna, my lawyer, holding a thick leather binder that contained the truth. To my left was Barney, wearing a crisp new Hayes Global mechanic uniform, with his name stitched over his heart. Behind them were the senior dispatchers, the fleet managers, the head of HR, the people Hunter had fired. The heart of the company. You ready for this, old friend? I asked Barney. Barney cracked his knuckles. I have been ready since Tuesday, boss. Let's go take back our house. I pushed the doors open. They swung inward, with a heavy, majestic weight. The noise in the boardroom stopped instantly. 20 heads turned in unison. They saw me standing there. Alonzo Hayes, the man they thought was a thief in a holding cell. I walked in with the heavy, rhythmic stride of a man who owns the floor he is walking on. My team followed me, fanning out like a phalanx. Hunter stared at me, his mouth falling open. Alonzo, how did you? I ignored him. I walked straight to the other end of the table, directly opposite Hunter, and placed my hands on the back of the vice chairman's chair. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, I said, my voice filling the room. I apologize for being late. I was detained by a misunderstanding involving your current CEO and the Chicago Police Department. Henderson looked relieved. Mr. Hayes, we were told you were being held without bail. A misunderstanding, I repeated. But I am not here to talk about my legal troubles. I am here to talk about your debt. Hunter stood up, knocking his coffee cup over. Cold brown liquid spilled across the polished wood. You cannot be here. Hunter shouted, his voice cracking. Security, get him out, he is trespassing. He pointed at Mike, the head of security, standing in the corner. Mike, remove him now, that is a direct order. The room held its breath. Hunter was technically still the CEO. To disobey him was insubordination. Mike looked at the coffee dripping off the table. He looked at the disheveled panic of a boy playing king. Then he looked at me. He saw Barney in his uniform. He saw the man who had built the walls he was paid to protect. Mike adjusted his belt and looked Hunter dead in the eye. I am sorry, Mr. Whitmore, but I cannot do that. What do you mean you cannot? I pay your salary, Hunter shrieked. No, sir, Mike said. You sign the checks, but the salary comes from the company. According to the bylaws, security answers to the board of directors. And right now, it looks like the board is listening to Mr. Hayes. You are fired. You are all fired. Hunter screamed. Nobody moved. The silence was the sound of gravity changing direction. Hunter was shouting at a storm, expecting the wind to obey him. Sit down, Hunter, I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried the authority of 40 years of leadership. It was a voice that did not ask for permission. Hunter saw the board looking at him with disgust. He realized he was completely alone. He sank back into his chair, defeated. I turned my attention to the board. You are wondering why the screens are red. You are wondering why TechStream is seizing your assets. I gestured to Sienna. She placed the leather binder on the table and opened it. Hayes Global is an operating entity. It is a tenant, and I am the landlord. I walked slowly around the table toward Hunter. For 10 years, I have leased the intellectual property and the physical assets to this company for a fraction of their value to protect the jobs of the people who work here. But the lease has conditions. I stopped right behind Hunter's chair. I could smell the stale sweat of his fear. Condition number 1. The company must maintain the fleet according to the Hayes Protocol, utilizing certified personnel. When Hunter fired the maintenance crew, he breached the lease. Sienna pulled out another document. But it gets worse. While Mr. Whitmore was accusing my client of embezzlement, we subpoenaed the corporate expense accounts. Sienna passed the copies down the table. You will see exactly where your emergency maintenance funds went. Henderson picked up the first sheet. $50,000 to a luxury event planner, $20,000 to a jeweler in Paris, $10,000 for a spa retreat in Aspen, and my personal favorite. Sienna said $15,000 for a custom wardrobe consultation, listed in the ledger as uniform redesign. The board members gasped. Henderson's hands were shaking with rage. This is criminal fraud. You stole corporate funds to pay for your lifestyle while the company was bleeding cash. Hunter started sweating profusely. It was for the brand. It was a marketing expense to attract investors. A diamond bracelet is not marketing. Sienna sliced through his excuse like a razor. And neither is the down payment on a Porsche, which you made last Friday using the payroll account. That is why the driver's checks bounced. Hunter, you didn't just spend the reserves, you stole their wages. Kylie, who had slinked into the back of the room, started to cry theatrically. She pointed a shaking finger at Hunter. He made me do it. I didn't know where the money came from. I am a victim here. Hunter looked at her with pure betrayal. You are a liar. You chose the bracelet. You booked the spa. You told me that if I didn't buy you these things, you would leave me. They stood there screaming at each other, accusing each other, tearing each other apart. It was pathetic, but the board needed to see exactly who had been sitting in the captain's chair. Then the double doors opened again. 4 men in dark blue windbreakers walked into the room. On the back of their jackets in bright yellow letters was the word, Police. These were not the beat cops Hunter had sent to arrest me. These were detectives from the Economic Crimes Unit. One of the detectives stepped forward and held up a warrant. Hunter Whitmore and Kylie Whitmore, you are under arrest for grand larceny, corporate embezzlement, and securities fraud. Hunter froze. The walls he had built to keep me out had become the walls of his own prison. This is a mistake, he whispered. He turned to me, his eyes wide and pleading. Alonzo, tell them it was a misunderstanding. I will pay it back. I swear, just don't let them take me. I sat perfectly still. I cannot help you, Hunter. I said, I am just the landlord. I don't interfere with the tenant's business, especially when that business is crime. The detectives moved in. They grabbed Hunter by the arms and spun him around. Click, click, click. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was metallic and loud. Kylie tried to run, but she tripped on her high heels and fell to the floor. A female officer pulled her up and cuffed her, as Kylie screamed about her rights. "Take them away," the detective ordered. The procession of shame moved slowly past the long table. The board members turned their chairs away, refusing to look. Hunter walked past me, stopping just 2 feet away. He looked at me, his face streaked with tears. He looked like a child who wanted his father to fix it. "Dad," he whispered. He hadn't called me that in 20 years. I did not look at him. I did not blink. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, focused on the empty leather chair at the head of the table. "Get him out of here," I said to the empty air. The detective shoved Hunter forward, and the crying faded down the hallway until the elevator doors closed. The room was silent. The smell of expensive perfume and fear was fading, replaced by the smell of coffee and old paper. The usurper was gone. The pretender had fallen. I stood up, walked to the head of the table, and pulled the chair out. I sat down. It groaned slightly under my weight, a familiar, welcoming sound. I turned back to the board. They were watching me, waiting for orders. "The fall is over," I said. "Now we rise. Let's get to work. The hardest part of a war is not the fighting. It is the cleaning up." The boardroom was empty, but the building was still filled with the wreckage of Hunter's tenure. Unpaid invoices, angry customers, and hundreds of terrified employees. I walked down from the executive suite to the main loading dock, the heart of Hayes Global, filled with the smell of diesel and hard work. I asked Mike to gather everyone. I looked at the sea of faces, people I had known for 20 years. "I owe you all an apology," I said, my voice echoing in the large cavernous space. "I let this happen. I built this company to be a fortress, but I left the gate unlocked. I gave a loaded weapon to a child, and you all suffered. You lost sleep, you lost wages. For that I am truly sorry." The room was silent. Hunter had never apologized in his life. "But sorry does not put food on the table," I continued. I realized this week that a company cannot belong to just one family, because bloodlines can get weak. The only people who truly care about the survival of this business are the people who bleed for it every day. I signaled to Sienna, who handed me a stack of papers. "As of this morning, I have dissolved the old operating structure. We are forming a new entity. Under the new charter, 30% of the company stock is being transferred into an employee stock ownership plan." A murmur went through the crowd. "It means you are not just employees anymore." I raised my voice. "It means you are owners. If the company makes a profit, you make a profit. And no one can ever sell this company out from under you again, because you will have a vote on the board." The shock turned into cheers. It started with Barney clapping his heavy, grease-stained hands. The entire loading dock shook with applause. It was the sound of loyalty being returned. I spent the next 2 hours shaking hands and signing checks from my personal account to cover the bounced payroll. Afterward, I called Barney into my office. I placed a new badge on the desk. It read, "Director of Fleet Operations." Barney wiped his hands on his pants. "Boss, I fix engines. I don't sit in meetings." "You don't need to wear a tie, Barney," I said. "Hunter fired the experts because he was threatened by them. I am promoting the experts because I need them. I need you to run the maintenance division. Make sure no Hayes truck ever breaks down on the highway again." Barney picked up the badge, his hands shaking slightly. "I won't let you down, Alonzo." He walked out a little taller. He wasn't a dinosaur anymore. He was the apex predator of the garage. While we were rebuilding, the world outside was tearing Hunter and Kylie apart. Social media is a cruel judge. Kylie's mugshot was trending on every platform. People dissected her old posts, pointing out the stolen money in every picture. Her followers dropped to 0. She was no longer an influencer. She was a cautionary tale. As for Hunter, legal experts predicted a 5-year sentence. He would spend his 30s in a cell, thinking about the empire he had crushed. The sun began to set over the city. The office was quiet. The red screens were gone, replaced by the steady green hum of a working system. I took the elevator down to the garage, walked past my polished Lincoln, and climbed into my rusted 1995 Ford F-150. The engine turned over with a rough mechanical roar. It was the sound of honesty. I drove north toward the cemetery. The air was cold and peaceful. I walked to Esther's grave, cleared away the dead flowers Hunter had ordered, and knelt on the grass. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the set of keys to the executive suite, and placed them on the headstone. "I did it, Esther," I whispered. "I saved it. It got a little messy. I had to be hard. But the house is clean, the people are safe, and the boy has been stopped. I am going to teach the next generation what you taught me, that a legacy is not what you leave for people. It is what you leave in people." I wiped the dirt from my knees and looked at the city lights twinkling in the distance. They didn't look like targets to be conquered. They looked like lights in the windows of families waiting for their packages. I climbed back into my truck and rested my hands on the steering wheel. I was 68 years old. I was alone, but I was the chairman, and tomorrow there was work to do. I learned that a legacy cannot be given. It must be earned. Respect is a currency you have to mint yourself every single day. I learned that silence is not always surrender. Sometimes it is just the quiet before the strike. And most importantly, I learned that no matter how much the world changes, hard work, loyalty, and knowing how to fix what you break will always win against a fancy suit and an empty promise. If you enjoyed watching Justice Be Served, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Let me know in the comments if you have ever had to remind someone of your true worth. I read every single one. Until next time, keep your engine running and your eyes on the road.